and gentlemen, welcome back to the Pause Reviews podcast. As always, I'm your host, Frank, joined by my trusty co-host, Tim.
Yes.
Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't say any blurb. We got to figure that out. I got to figure out some kind of a tagline. I feel like that's what we're missing.
I just always feel like I'm ripping off other podcasts when I do that. Like the one that comes to mind is this podcast where they investigate things of dubious or paranormal nature, right?
Ooh.
Like cults and things like that. And their tagline is great. It's we show up so you don't have to. So like let us.
I don't know what that means.
But like let us go visit the Scientology Center and find out all about it and tell you so you don't have to waste your time doing it, or let us join this cult so we can tell you all about the inner workings of it so you don't have to.
So the general rule, right, is that within the first 30 seconds, your listener should know exactly what your show is about. So in our case, it's movie reviews, but it's a little bit more than that, right? We're curating this content to try to help you decide what to watch tonight and make recommendations of whether something is worth it or not, that kind of thing.
Right. Yep.
So we got to try to boil that down into some kind of a catchy, quick thing that hits right from jump so that when people tune in, they know what they're getting. That one, I mean, I'm not here to critique. I don't even have a tagline, and we're not here to, this is not a podcast where we critique other podcasts' taglines, but we show up so you don't have to. It could be anything. That feels like that almost to me sounds like a plumber. Right.
I mean, that's what it boils down to. I think there's a little bit more leading into that. It's been a while since I've listened to it, but they've been around for quite some time. They've got a good following. So
is your toilet boiling over with human excrement? We show up so you don't have to.
I want to say it's like we investigate claims of the paranormal, something.
Okay, now we're dialing something in.
Yeah, there's a little bit more preceding that, but yeah, it's that is the part, the meat of it that I remember for sure.
That's the jangle.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I like it. Dude, I am so excited for this week's episode. Like, giddy. I have been wanting to talk about this movie for so long. We are going to discuss The Guest. The Guest is available on Netflix now. It stars Dan Stevens. You've probably never seen it. If you have, then you know why I'm excited. And if you don't know why I'm excited and you've seen it, then this probably isn't the podcast for you. But dude, how long have I been talking about watching this movie?
Oh yeah, I have this written down here that that I went into this knowing full well that you loved this movie, and literally it's been on our short list for a long time.
Yeah, I'm like, I'd say probably at least every 2 to 3 weeks when we're trying to decide what's gonna come next. It's like, oh, I really want to do The Guest. Like, this is, it always has been on the forefront. And it's gotten to the point where, I mean, after last week's episode, we weren't sure what we were going to talk about this week. And again, I was like, well, we could do this. And I mean, I always want to talk about The Guest. And you're like, dude, you won't shut up about this movie. Let's just do that one. And I've been hesitant just because now that we took this new turn, you hadn't seen it yet. So I was hesitant to put it on a deep dive without you having seen it, and taking that risk, because this is supposed to be the episode where we're saying, hey, like, this is something worth watching.
Yeah. At the same time, though, I think it makes more sense now than it did last season, because we've taken that turn again, which is like, hey, this is available on streaming. It doesn't have to be something new, right? Last year we were trying to stay current and topical a little bit more, and we're still doing that a little bit with the rewind stuff, but I feel like it works a little bit more this with this season, but I'm excited to talk about this one because of that very fact, because I knew you loved it and you had questions of why you loved it, so I wanted to kind of see if I could also approach it that way of being like, where do I end up with this, and do I have questions? And so we're gonna see. I think we have a kind of a cool little thing that we can do with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think based on sort of brief conversations we've had, this episode may have a little flavor, a little tinge of can we convince Tim? I think, because I mean, I came into this one hard, and it was I was like, man, am I gonna have to really like swing a skeptic here? So I guess that'll kind of be our approach. We'll dive in and we'll sort of unpack things as we go, knowing full well I am 100% about this movie.
Yep.
So as I mentioned, the movie we're talking about is The Guest, starring Dan Stevens and Maika Monroe, available now on Netflix, so free to stream there. It's billed as an action thriller, and it was released on September 5th of 2014, rated R. Before we jump into some of the critic scores that we try to touch on a little bit, who is the production team behind this? And this one, there's so much I want to kind of chat about here, but it was directed by Adam Wingard, and Adam Wingard was known for, and this movie has always been billed as like from the producers, from the team that brought you, from the of the team that brought you the movie You're Next. I had never seen that movie.
Yeah,
I have since watched it.
Yep.
But this was really hyped as sort of the follow-up to this, smashing success of You're Next. He had also directed the movie VHS, ABCs of Death, VHS 2, Blair Witch, the Netflix version of Death Note, and most recently, he directed Godzilla vs. Kong, which is dropping on HBO Max later this coming month.
Yeah, I'm actually... I, every once in a while, those catch my eye. I haven't seen the first Godzilla movie, the reboot.
Oh, the King of Monsters one?
Yeah, with like the American cinematic universe that they're going with. Something about this seems interesting. I don't know if I'll watch it or not. I don't know.
It's the thing that's really interesting, it's a really big leap for him. VHS was garbage, but VHS, ABCs of Death, even Blair, I guess Blair Witch was intended to be more of a mainstream, like wide release type reboot of the classic, but it really didn't do well at all. And then everything else is kind of to streaming or, whatnot.
Yeah.
So to make that leap to Godzilla vs. Kong is substantial for him. He pairs up a lot with the writer of this movie, Simon Barrett, who also wrote You're Next, VHS, ABCs of Death, VHS 2, and Blair Witch. And that's kind of where they've parted ways. But this team has obviously worked together quite a bit. They've worked together a lot in this horror genre, in this indie horror genre. And there is a flavor of that in The Guest.
Yeah, for sure.
So now jumping back to sort of the, how it was received, right? Rotten Tomatoes, 91% is the critic score, but the audience score is only 69%. So a massive, massive drop-off when it comes to just general audience. And again, and as much as we hate to say it, this is a movie, an example of something where I wholeheartedly agree with the critics. I think I think a lot of the people who watch this one really missed something special the first time. And we kind of had a little bit of this in some, in a previous episode where we talked about the 5-year engagement. This is one of those where I can understand in the first watch how it was a little bit too out there for most people. But if you give it a second watch, there's something really, really magical about this movie. So anyways, I think critics tend to catch that kind of stuff out the gate. They're looking for more of that. Whereas audiences, maybe they're going in expecting something closer to You're Next, this straight up beat 'em up slasher, and they're getting something much more of a slow burn.
We definitely did that with the Happy Death Day and Freaky, right? Like, we had a certain expectation built for Freaky.
Yes.
And, critically, we're kind of like, it didn't live up to that. But audience-wise, and people I've talked to anecdotally, loved Freaky. So
that's wild to me. Yeah, I really did not enjoy it.
Right.
So this was mirrored in the box office. And I wasn't able to find out. I'm relatively certain this was a limited release, but I haven't been able to confirm that for sure. But this movie was made on a budget of $5 million, but it was barely able to recoup even half of that. So the worldwide gross on this one was $2.7 million. So a massive critical success, a middling success with audiences, but a total flop in theaters.
Yes.
I mean, not being able to recoup even a $5 million investment is tough. And we're not even doing our little thing of doubling the budget because, this wasn't one that I don't think got much marketing anyway. At least I don't remember it.
Yeah, no. I mean, and you would think, too, if off of the success of Your Next, it would have at least brought people in to the theater. So I'm guessing that lends a little credence to the idea that it was maybe a little bit more of a limited release, because if that one is so critic or audience loved, I feel like that buys you a little bit of goodwill, at least to break even.
Yeah, Your Next is kind of the opposite. It did okay, right? The critic score for Your Next is about 79%. I just watched it today. It isn't, I mean, it's not awful. The acting, the writing is sort of atrocious. But in terms of like kills, it's kind of in line with like The Strangers, this home invasion type thing. The kills are pretty excellent, whatever, but the story itself has a ton of problems. And we're not here to talk about that one, but if you haven't seen it, that one is available on Hulu, and for so many reasons, I'd say it's worth a watch, but it isn't good, so we're not going to recommend it. But that movie was made on a budget of $1 million, and you can see every cent.
Yeah.
But it was made on a budget of $1 million, but it grossed worldwide $28 million in the box office.
Dang.
That is insane return on investment. So absolutely, after Your Next, they're going to greenlight anything. And in fact, Your Next launched, we talk so much about the team that brought you Your Next brings you the guest, but it also launched VHS, ABCs of Death, VHS 2. Those all came out after Your Next and were total flops. So that may have cooled the temperatures down leading up to the guest, where people maybe didn't go see it because they'd been burned so many times. If they were huge fans, cult fans of this slasher movie.
Yeah, that is absolutely fair.
So let's get into the movie itself. Why? Because it's delicious. The synopsis from IMDb is: a soldier introduces himself to the Peterson family, claiming to be a friend of their son who died in action. After the young man is welcomed into their home, a series of accidental deaths seem to be connected to his presence. Dun, dun,
Okay.
dun. Yeah.
All right.
Right? I mean, that's generally what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've already touched on and let the cat out of the bag about why I've been eager to do this movie, which is that I am obsessed with it. So the question I have been dying to know the answer to, Tim, generally, what was your take on this movie?
Okay, so I think I'm going to hold back on disclosing my final verdict in favor of a little exercise here.
Okay.
I mean, I think this really gets at the spirit of what we're trying to do. Again, as we've been kind of keeping with this idea that I want to sort of approach this, knowing full well that you loved it. Again, it's been on the short list. We've mentioned that. We've been talking about this for a long time. But in talking with you about it previously, you weren't 100% sure why you loved it. And we've touched on some of the oddness again with the Rotten Tomato scores. Like critically, it's great. Audience, not so much. And we just talked about one last week where we were sort of in that same boat, like we were with the critics and not with the audience. So I wanted to pose to you the thoughts that I had coming into this fresh, having not seen it. Again, a little trepidation with that because these are the episodes where we want to bring something to the table that we are endorsing. So I wanted to just get your thoughts on the parts of this that I thought really made this movie weak, at least initially, right? As I'm watching it going,
okay.
And see kind of if,
put the burden of proof on me.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can convince me and then, convince the audience by way of me that this is actually worthy of a deep dive episode and our endorsement, right? So
our prized endorsement.
Right. So, off the bat, Dan Stevens as David.
I just want to wrap my brain around it. Are we diving into the questioning here?
Yeah.
Okay, so I should I'm ready. All right.
Yeah. So get ready. So you mentioned, right, that he shows up and the family just brings him right in, right? It's
Right.
in the tagline,
Right.
on the IMDb synopsis. They are way too accepting of this guy right off the bat. Like, their guest, he shows up at the door, and there's a little trepidation from the mom, but like the minute he's like, yeah, I served with your kid, they're like, hey, here's some beers, here's his old bedroom. You'll want to wait until his sister wakes up from her nap so you can say hello. And then, like, within minutes, he's knocking him back with the dad that night, watching TV. They're having a heart to heart, and then he's like picking the kid up from school the next day, like the younger son,
Right.
and like taking him to a bar, like just like he wastes no time making their home his. And all he has to do is say, like, oh yeah, I knew your son. He wanted me to check in on you and tell you that he loved you. Their son never wrote home about him and their platoon. Like, oh, hey, I got these buddies in my platoon, right? We went through training together. We're deployed together. Mm-hmm. This guy, David, he's my best friend. He's from wherever. No mention of him. There's a photo that he says is him on their mantle. Oh, okay, sure. He was his best friend, though. And he never mentioned it.
Okay, right? Okay. So
then my reaction really ends up being, and I texted you this, screw these people. They deserve everything that is inevitably going to happen to them because they just let this guest, this dude who is strange from the jump, just kind of move right in. And additionally then, this caused me to struggle with who I was rooting for in this movie.
Yeah.
Because I don't really care about these dumb people that just invited this guy into their house.
Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, if I end up glossing over that last part, make sure you remind me because I think that is an interesting situation that this movie sets up in terms of who are you rooting for. Sure. Okay. So let me see if I can touch on some of these things. I did not struggle with this stuff at all, and I think the key thing to remember here is context clues, right? This movie unapologetically drops you directly into a snapshot in time, right?
Yes.
You get zero setup. There is no exposition. You learn what you learn through as the Petersons learn it. And that is one of my favorite ways of storytelling in film, right? Like this is it can be so it's something a lot of people hate, right? People like a very traditional setup to a inciting incident, which leads to why the hero goes on their journey. So like essentially the first 10% of traditional, filmmaking or storytelling in film or screenwriting, right? The first 10% sets up the story. And it all leads and culminates into an inciting incident that sets our hero on their journey. And then in the first act, they start and they experience issues and troubles. And then in the second act, they as they plummet down and face conflicts, they start to work their way up right into the end of the second act. They hit like some epic boss fight, and then boom, right? He plummets down to nothingness, the point of no return, like complete and utter defeat. And then we spend the third act watching them claw their way impossibly out of this chasm and culminate in this epic victory, right? That's what people like. I love it when someone just takes a snapshot of a moment in time and says, we're just going to experience this with these people and let's go on this journey together. It's a little bit unnerving. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but that is so fitting in this story. We aren't supposed to know who David is. We aren't supposed to fully understand it. And that launches this innate tension in us, the viewer, that will take us through this slow burn thriller, right? Mm-hmm. There are no jump scares. There are no, cheap thrills. This is meant to be a very psychological and emotional watch. And the way they do that off the bat is, boom, who's this guy? I don't know, right? Why are they letting him in? So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
That part didn't bother me so much. We come into this story, we see a wife sending her son off to school. We see a husband who leaves. There's a coldness there, right? And then through context clues, the mother sits down in this chair and it's obvious that her son has died, right?
Yes.
And we see this through a lot of the kitschy cliche things.
Yeah.
There's a picture of her son, in his uniform, and there's a little, a little plaque next to it, and it says, something along the lines of all gave some gave all. Right. So, and we kind of get a quick snapshot tour of these little memorials of her son on this thing, and she's sitting there crying.
Right.
She hears the knock on the door, opens the door, and there stands Dan Stevens as David. And, and he turns and he's like, "Hey, my name's David. How you doing, ma'am? I was friends with your son. I served with him, told him I'd check in," that kind of thing, right? She invites him in hesitantly. And it comes out that he ran from the bus station, which was a long way. And, so she offers him a drink of water. And then he says to her, "I was very good friends with your son. I was there with him when he died. And he wanted me to give you this message," et cetera, et cetera. And this sets her off. She has to immediately excuse herself. She goes away. She's crying. She's bawling. When she comes back, he points to a picture that they have on the mantelpiece and says, "This is me." This is such a key moment, right? Because here's a picture of her son that she has in her home with his unit. And this guy, David, is in the picture. This gives validation. This is as good as an ID to her, because what he suddenly becomes, they're roughly the same age, roughly the same height. They don't necessarily look alike, but here's this young guy who served in the military, was discharged, he was injured, served with her son, and he can suddenly, very easily, become a surrogate for the son she lost. And so she very quickly welcomes him in and even offers for him to stay there overnight because he doesn't have a place to go. But not only that, she doesn't offer him the couch. She offers him her son's room. And her response, and he even points out how awkward that is. He goes, "Ma'am, are you sure you want me sleeping in here?" Right? The room looks exactly how their son left it. And her response to that is, "It's not getting used anyway." Of course, he would have liked, right? So she is immediately finding some kind of motherly, bandage in David for the son that she lost. And this is repeated through the fact that, the kids seem to think it's super weird and odd. The husband comes home and is like, "What the heck? We know nothing about this guy." Right? Like the dad is not very welcoming of him at first. This is all very much seen through the mother, who has clearly been the one who has been grieving the most. And everyone else in the house seems to reluctantly accept it because they recognize this is something she needs.
Yeah.
And so all of that kind of comes together, I think, as you watch these moments play out. It comes together to sort of establish a framework where this really weird and out of the normal thing is all explained by the depths of this woman's grief and how that grief can make us do things we wouldn't normally do.
Yeah, and I think when you put it that way, so if you sort of think about, like, as parents, you raise your kid, and if you trust your kid to make good friends, and their son went into the military, you can just sort of, I guess, assume that, like, this kid was in the military, he served, and if you feel like you raised your kid well enough, David is probably a good dude, right?
And he's coming on a noble errand.
Right. So in that context, I think, I could come around to that. It's like, you're feeling that void, as you would with anything else. People, you lose a pet and then you get another pet right away, or you redirect that love to something else, right? And so I can definitely see how they can just kind of like, all right, let mom get this out of her system, and we'll kind of move on. And I think the little brother ends up, doing the same thing. He's picked on at school, and his dad doesn't seem to have the time to devote to him, to help him deal with being bullied and things. And he doesn't have an older brother now, and his sister's also, she's trying to work her way through she's still in high school at this time. I forget.
She is not. No, she's in her 20s.
Right. Okay. So she's trying to work her, get money for college, and she's between college and high school. So, he sort of does the same thing as the mom. Just kind of David gets sucked into that vacuum. So I think with that, I can be okay with that. But to not gloss over the next fact, my next, question, does that help you root for the family when things kind of go sideways?
So that's a really interesting part. And before I touch on that, I want to make one more statement too, because I think you brought it up in terms of, how the kids, the kids are a different situation. I think the mother obviously thought very highly of the son. The age gap between the eldest son, who's in the military, or who has died, right, and the youngest son is significant. Right? If we take it that David and this guy are approximately the same age, at the youngest, David's in his, mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
Maybe somewhere in the range of 25 to 28. Because Anna is in her early 20s.
Right.
And
she's going to be 21 in a week or something like
21
that.
in a month, yep.
Yeah.
And she... there are, again, context clues when she's talking to her boyfriend, Zeke, when she's talking with her friends. When Zeke is like, oh, I'm so sorry, this guy's come and remind you of the brother, she's not so troubled by the death of her brother. And if you figure, we don't know how long he was serving. Did he join up right after high school? Has he been gone for 7-8 years?
Right.
Do they even really know? So if let's just say, I don't know, 5 years to be safe, she was 15 when he left. They don't have much of a relationship. And if you subtract easily 3 years for the younger son, he's maybe 17 going into senior year at most, right? So he was 12, right, when his older brother left, which means when his brother was in the house, he was sub 10. So these are not children who had a strong connection with their older brother and have had to live in this shadow. And when he died, they have to live in the shadow of this great sacrifice and then deal with a mother who's been absolutely devastated by the loss of it. So this all rings a bit more for them as, I don't know, just more of a negative to have him come around. Now, it would make sense that the younger brother would have a stronger turn towards David because he represents the older brother he maybe always wanted and didn't have. And he develops a very strong connection to David. And David is so protective of him, the way that his brother wasn't there to be while he's getting bullied at school.
Right.
Anna's situation is slightly different because she is sexually attracted to David. And so, this is obviously weird, but what he represents to her is what she wants her boyfriend to be. Because, again, what she mentions is that she's saving up money for school, but she feels like, Zeke is just this, kind of waste of space sometimes who just sells drugs or whatever and doesn't do much to further himself and is kind of an anchor on her, which is why David feels he needs to help her and relieve her of this burden. All that being said, who do you root for? That's one of the brilliant things of this movie. David eventually becomes the villain, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have met him. We have severe questions, but everything he does is, right, like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
Yeah, sure.
He does awful things, but he does them in his mind for a noble reason. They're extreme and terrible. And obviously we're not intended to necessarily... what it is that we're not really intended to necessarily root for him, but it's very difficult to root against him. I find myself, even in the end, where he's sort of having it out, and this is obviously spoilers. We always kind of talk spoilers a bit.
Yeah.
And we're jumping around here, assuming you've seen the movie. When we get to the end sequences where he is hunting down the children, I'm not necessarily rooting for them to win. Right. I would be okay either way. It would make sense as a moviegoer to watch, David fall at the hands of the children. But at the same time, I like David. I, as the viewer, fall for him the same way that the son does, that Anna does. He is charming. He charms you watching him to forgive the awful things he is doing.
He's a very strange version of, of the anti-hero, right?
Absolutely.
Like we've seen it a ton in recent years, whether it's like a Sons of Anarchy or Breaking Bad or something like this, right? These guys we're rooting for, we really shouldn't be rooting for them because they're drug dealers and outlaws, right? And he, like those things you talk about, when he beats up the high schoolers in a bar, it's like, yeah, it was fairly noble, but he was so violent, and the kid's like, cool, he just saved my butt, right? Or when he goes to the high school with the mom and gets the kid out of expulsion by threatening the school with legal action, and he's just,
that's the tamest thing. Yeah, like
right,
that was
right.
Like, how did he not murder the principal?
Right. But there's still something just off-putting about, like, well, who are you? Well, I'm a friend, right?
Friend
like,
of the family. Yeah.
Yeah, he's just so off-putting.
But that's what plays out. People,
yeah.
I mean, even the principal he's immediately intimidated by him. And it isn't the threat. It is only by his presence. Yes. And to the point where he's like, who are you? Like, why am I scared of this guy? And it's so good. It is a masterpiece of, we obviously don't want to root for the villain.
Right.
But in the end, you're not rooting against him either. And I think that is something that's really fun. It makes you feel dirty. It makes you feel awful. But that fits with what this movie, it is a dirty, weird, just backwards movie, start to finish, in all the great ways.
Sure. So I think that brings me to my next question, because we've kind of touched on it a little bit, so there might be a little bit of a redundancy in this, but we gloss over a ton of backstory, right? And I think the main portion where this got me was, Anna makes in her suspicion, she decides to call the army base. Like, she's the only one who says, let's just be safe. Let's do our due diligence and let's just be sure, because it's a little off on this guy.
Yeah.
Speaking from personal experience, where I had family invite very distant Facebook discovered family into our home to stay for a little while. I was on the fence of like, maybe we should just run a background check on this person, and other people in my family were like, they're family.
They're family.
Like, so I get that. Just, she doesn't find anything. She keeps it to herself, and great. But she gets a weird response from the base, right? That turns the movie on its head, really, right? At this point. So, we, as you mentioned, are just dropped right in there. We don't know how long the son has been dead, and we touched on that. And that kind of leads into, what we discussed with the mom and creating that vacuum where it just kind of gets David sucked into it. But the one that's really got me is, we get to a point where the military has showed up at the Peterson home. They've had a shootout with David. Everyone is pretty much dead except David and the Colonel, Colonel Carver, or Captain Carver, who was sent with this squad.
I think Major Carver.
Major, something like that. Carver's able to get Anna at the diner before David gets there, and she's like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "Oh, David's a super soldier."
Right.
That's it. Like, there's allusion to this program and that he escaped from it, but she's just like, okay. And in a normal, more traditionally scripted movie, you would get some sort of flashback or some sort of, well, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Are there more of them? Do we get some sort of more expose on that? But we don't get nothing. We get no further explanation of what the super soldier program is. I mean, that also made me question, is the Peterson son even dead? Because David is technically dead. So
David is, but we also know that this guy is not David. Okay, do you want me to? What you got more?
Yeah, so I mean, that's the be all and end all of that is there's just no big exposition in places where you come to expect the exposition, right?
Agreed. Fully agreed, not arguing that. My response to that will be, do you really want what you're asking for? Because, right? So here's my take on it. I love that we're dropped in. I love that we're not given a lot of backstory. I love that we're left to kind of put the pieces together as we can. And this is almost happening real time. And so we don't have the time to hear from Major Carver in the same way that, Anna doesn't have that time, whatever. I will go further as to say that this movie is intended to be an action thriller mystery type thing, not a sci-fi action type movie. I think the notion of this super soldier thing, I absolutely could have a whole nother episode and will entertain all conversations, because I would agree with you. Do we really need that to be the case? I don't know, maybe not. I'm glad it's there though, right? Because so he does nothing. It's not like he's Captain America. It's more like a Winter Soldier-y type thing where he's sort of been brainwashed, right? He has triggers, mental triggers that will set him off to do. He doesn't have superhuman strength. He can't run super. I mean, we do see him run from the depot to the house, but there's no indication that he does that very quickly. And military guys run for miles and miles on end in full gear. Sure. So this is for example, I went to high school with a kid whose dream was to be in the Navy. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL, and every single day. After school, because I wouldn't see him arrive, he would go. He would put his school shoes in his bag. He would put on a pair of shorts. He would put his backpack on and cinch it real tight, and he would run home. And I went to O'Connell. Like, this is not a school like public school where you live within the bounds of the school. Yeah, he ran miles every day. Like, full buzz cut, like high and tight, like to the nines, right? This was a kid who wasn't even in the military yet. So, I mean, for all I know, he's like some, I don't know, like mega general. I don't know. Right. But the point is that's none of that. He does nothing outside the realm of possibility for any human. Certainly one who's been trained, right? Sure. So this super soldier thing is more of like a mental conditioning. I think, though, that we need that because it even more so endears us to the villain. These are not choices he was born wanting to make. He's not some sick serial killer. He is a product of... So now, who's our real villain? It's not David, right? It's this idea, this construct of this paramilitary group. Because that's the other thing, right? Major Carver is not in the military. Maybe he's retired. When they go after David, when they get indication that someone has asked about David and they're going to go track him down to kill him, he's like, get me every mercenaries, whatever, right? He is hiring a team of ex-military people, of which he is one. Now, Easter egg, if you watch You're Next... They make reference in the movie that the dad worked for KPG, which is the company that Major Carver works for. And then we find out in Your Next that KPG is a defense contractor. So Major Carver, again, so anyways, a little backstory there. But even in the movie, we see that this is a paramilitary group. So who's the real villain? It's not David. It's the evil contractors who have brainwashed him and all these other soldiers to be these super weapons without feeling or emotion, and it is backfiring on them. And David is a victim as much as anybody else. We also see scenes and moments where his brainwashing kicks in, right? So essentially, Carver comes to the Peterson home to kill David, and clearly anybody else in the house, because they just blast the house to pieces with reckless abandon, right? And I believe
my thought at that point was, they're going to need to move. They're going to need a new house.
They're dead. So David, immediately it triggers, right? Now, he is there with good intentions, albeit he's executing them poorly, but he's there to genuinely help the Peterson family, because it turns out he really did promise their son he would do that. Yeah. Is it Caleb? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so So now he's getting shot up. He knows now that the daughter has ratted him out, blown his cover. And what we find out from Major Carver is that his training, his brainwashing, will immediately circumvent every other mission he has and make his only mission to tie up his loose ends, to protect his identity and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So he starts, his new mission is to kill everyone who had met him or come into contact with him in this town. Yes. And he's sitting in the kitchen with the mom who welcomed him in. And right before he kills her, he says, my mission, like, I promised your son I would check in on you and help you any way that I could. And that became my mission to do that. And I genuinely came here to do that. Your daughter messed it up and brought these guys here. And now your son he was in the same program as me. The mom says, what program is that? And he goes, it would take too long for me to explain it to you. But know that he would understand why I have to do this now. And then pumps a knife right into her chest. Yep. So that whole part tells us so much. A, the son is the same as him. B, probably why he hasn't written home in a while. C, they are all victims and products of this government thing. And therefore, we're now okay with even further rooting for him, even if it comes at the expense of this innocent family, because he too is quote unquote an innocent, right? On and on and on it goes. And so, I'll get lost in the weeds, but to answer the looming question of, does it bother you that there's not more exposition? Not at all. We saw this fail in John Wick. What made John Wick so glorious is that, okay, there's a currency that goes along with these, Russian mobsters. There's an underworld. There's a way to get right. We get introduced to these things and we're okay not knowing more about it, and we just sit back and watch the action. It's the same thing here. And the waters don't get muddied and the movie doesn't get bogged down with this need to explain every detail and really slow the pacing that you've been building towards this whole time, right? Like, let's ignore that, accept it for what it is, and just, we just sort of take it as truth without needing more. When you start pulling on that thread, as we've seen in John Wick, it just gets dirtier and dirtier, more and more confusing, bigger and bigger, and it will just continue to spiral out of control. This is what John Wick should have been. Just a beautiful one-off bubble that just exists in its own ecosystem and is great and is all the better for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right there, because once I got that initial thought out there and you let it marinate a little bit, you're like, well, where would I want that, right? Where would I want a flashback? Where that's going to add time. This clocks in an hour and 40 minutes, and it's crisp and it's concise. And then, like you said, you start pulling at those threads by adding that in there. You're going to add runtime. You're going to drag it down. And really, I'm glad that I went back and your suggestion and watched Your Next to see where this writing team came from, because they do add some weird exposition at points in that movie where, there's characters that are doing certain things and acting certain ways, and you're like, why is this person doing that? And then you get the sense halfway through the script that they're like, oh, we need to explain that. So the person goes on this random soliloquy about, hey, my dad was a crazy survivalist and we decided to move to the desert because of this and this and this, and now I'm like, trained to be a survivalist. And you're like, oh, well, it's a little late for that. I don't need to know that now.
Right. And it doesn't make sense to have this conversation now. You've got bigger problems. Exactly right. Exactly right. And pacing is the key element here. This movie perfectly gives you this slow burn, right? We talked about how the movie starts and builds innate tension, right? And that continues to build and carries you through the movie, leading up to when the crap hits the fan, right? We've slowly pushed the sled up to the top of the hill, and now we get to experience the fruits of our labor. We're going to mount up, Who cares what's on the bottom of the hill? Who gives a crap how we even got here, right? Like, you know, why are these two children up here on this mountain with this sled? Where's the adult supervision? I don't care, Tim. I want to sit on this sled with you, and I want to ride down this mountain at epic speeds. And if I have to stop and start explaining the here's, the whys, and the whats, then you're just going to lose that thrill that carries you into the third act, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So just sit on the sled with me, buddy, and let's take the ride of our lives.
Well, so as we're kind of coming to the bottom of that hill,
okay,
you had a kind of a good transition in there earlier. You know, we're talking about, you know, his programming, right, and his training, and this sort of you know, prime directive of, you know, at all costs, I got to take care of my, you know, me first, right? Despite whatever other mission I'm on.
Right.
And so this movie doesn't really end. It just stops, right? Going back to that idea of we're being dropped into something. It just stops.
Yep.
Now, I love the final line. I think the final line is hilarious.
Yeah.
I think it's great. But it doesn't make sense to that programming, right? It doesn't make sense to David's his mission. There has to be more to his story, because as we've established, to protect his identity now that it's been compromised, the kids have to die. They have to die. They know who he is. They have him identified.
How do you know that doesn't happen?
Well, he sort of, it just assumes that he Ocean's 11's himself out of there, and that's it.
Well, okay.
Right?
I take your point, counselor, and I counter with, I disagree.
Okay.
I think this is textbook open-ended. So the movie ends.
You're going like Sopranos, right? So
right. Did he die? Did he? Right.
Right.
So
black.
Exactly. So this movie. Now, what's brilliant about this movie, and I've said this a lot, right? You show us in the beginning what pays off in the end. There's a few things that happen throughout the movie, right? Yeah. Like he gives the kid the knife, and that plays in, and things like that. But that's not necessarily the same thing. I think what this movie does really well is it gives you that in its edit, right? It is black, boom, first shot, boots on ground, running. We are in, right? End scene, shot of girl seeing David. What the boom. End scene. This is a snapshot. We don't get the beginning. We also don't get to see the end. We are left to make up our minds about what happens to these children and to David based on what we've seen so far. And all opinions are valid, right?
Yeah.
Has enough of David, you know, has he seen the errors of his ways and said, I'm going to fight this thing. I didn't want to kill these people. I didn't want to kill this woman. I didn't want to kill whatever. So I just want to get out of here. I see the kids. I'm going to Ocean's 11, as you put it, my way out of here and fine. Okay, that's a valid thing. Is it in line with the character we've seen through the whole movie? No, but is there an argument to be made that there's a human underneath the mask of this killer? Perhaps. What I like to think is that no, he Ocean's 11's his way out of the room of firefighters, and as soon as he sees the kids, will end them abruptly.
Yeah.
But we aren't privy to any of that, because this movie ends as it began, in the middle of the story. And just like we didn't get to see the lead up, we don't get to see the finale. Anything could have happened. And that alone could drive a ton of people crazy. And I agree with you that if you side on the way of he lets the kids go, there's an argument to be made that's out of character. I would argue maybe not. I also would argue even further, I don't necessarily think those kids make it. And her reaction is not one of like, respect, like we understand. No, her reaction is, oh my God, like it's not over. It isn't over. He's still alive. He's coming for us. What the right? Like that is her thing.
Yeah, and I would argue too that it can't be over, right? Because when they get into this gym where this final fight happens, there's a teacher that's collateral damage,
right?
And Major Carver gets his.
Yep.
it gets like his arms like slashed open and he ends up
box
bleeding
cutter
out.
to the wrists.
Yep. And we assume David is dead.
As you do. Right. Well, and he catches a butterfly knife to the chest.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. After, I think he's
or maybe like the solar plex. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's sort of right below.
Did he take a bullet too? One or two, I think.
He took, he's got a bullet in the leg and a bullet in the gut.
And did Anna shoot him once? No,
he caught the bullets at the massacre at the house. Yeah.
What did she do? She bashed him over the head a couple times or something. She took a couple swings at him. So there should. Oh wait,
no, she does shoot him.
Right? I thought so. I think. I forget.
She has a gun and she shoots it. Yeah.
All this to say, there should be 3 bodies in the gym once it has burned down, right? But
there should be Carver, there should be Teacher, and there should be David. Right.
Right. But the firefighters say there's 2 bodies inside.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's when we see him come out and she gives her, what the moment. And it can't be over because she's going to tell somebody, no, there should be 3 bodies. Like, hey, you need to figure this out. So
yeah, one of your firefighters is dead now.
You better, check some lockers for him because you got a naked firefighter stuffed up in there somewhere.
Right.
So it can't be over. Right? Because she's going to tell them and they're going to swarm, right? So either David's now going to have to kill everybody, right? All the firefighters or whatever, or he's got to beat his retreat and stalk them later. So it can't be over.
Yes.
It can't be.
I will also argue, Tim, you're asking way too many questions about how we got to the top of the hill. You know? Yeah. We just take this ride, baby. So okay, before we get into the grand finale here, because we're coming up on time, but I really need to point out, if you've stuck with us so far, thank you. Mm-hmm. And Dan Stevens in this movie is freaking sensational. So Dan Stevens did a lot of work before Downton Abbey, but Downton Abbey, none of us had ever heard of him until Downton Abbey. Downton Abbey is what brought him to the U.S. in any capacity, and this is his first at-bat. This was the first released at-bat for him post-Downton Abbey. So he leaves Downton Abbey in about 2013 when his contract originally ends, and it's because he wants to go into movies. They had extended Downton Abbey for 2 more years. He had the opportunity to sign on. He says no. Spoiler alert within a spoiler alert. Matthew Crawley is no more. So this was his first attempt at saying, hey guys, this is what I want to do. I want to be a badass Hollywood leading man. Mm-hmm. And this was the project he chose. And this dude is on another level. The scenes where he, these will be my closing arguments for you. The scenes where he goes from the demon robot that lives in his brain, right? He goes into rooms. He's perfectly sociable when he's talking to the mom. Man, well, if you insist that I stay, blah, 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 blah. Absolutely. Okay, no problem. Keep in mind, by the way, to speak to the first point, he never asks for any of it. He only accepts upon their insistences. So, he is happy to come, check in, make sure they're good, make sure they know he loves them, and be on his way. That's another thing. So, he has all these interactions that are normal. When the mom shows him, okay, well, I'll leave you to get ready, closes the door, he just sits and stares at the wall. In the scenes where he goes to the party and then comes back and Make 'em a Rose in her room, and she's like, oh, woo, this is great, what a good time. And then it cuts to him just standing and staring demonically out the window. And then there's even when he's talking to the kid. When he's talking to Luke, and Luke is telling him about how his sister has found him out and is planning to rat him out. And I want you to know because we're friends. And every bit that Luke is guessing right, you see him like, I'm going to slaughter you. And then when Luke's like, but we're friends, right? And the charm comes right back. And he's like, of course we are, Luke.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you don't see it any better than when Luke and David are at the bar. Right?
Yes.
And they're sitting there kind of doing that brother thing, like, I'm going to take you into the bar, like, we're going to hang out, I'm going to order a drink here, you can try my drink, and let's order some joke drinks for the group over there. And then he just demolishes a bunch of high schoolers, like, in an instant, flips a switch, drink to the face, and those kids are broken.
It's fantastic. So, I mean, honestly, hands down, enough cannot be said about the sheer talent that Dan Stevens displays on screen. Say what you want about him. Say what you want about him in other movies, subsequent movies, right? Walk Among the Tombstones. I mean, he was fine. You know, he's done a lot. I'm a big Dan Stevens fan, and it started here. This movie showed me this dude is for real. Do not sleep on this man. He is fantastic in this movie. Additionally, I mean, we've talked in context about how great this is written, how unique it's done. The soundtrack is stellar. It really just sets the tone and the mood. It's this weird underground poppy type thing that is, it's just different than most things that you've seen, even the things that are exactly like this, right? Yeah. This does not live on an island, but it stands as like king of those that do live on that island. It is so well done.
And you even get, you know, there's flashes of, you know, 80s slasher in this. You know, you're set in the backdrop of Halloween, which you kind of even forget about. And you know,
the music is very synthesizer-y and weird and trippy.
Yeah, and you get this final showdown at a high school gym that's been, you know, set up for a Halloween dance. It's part haunted house, and you know, the people in costumes and things like that. And even, you know, David ends up kind of operating by the Jason Voorhees school of like, he's not really down when he's down sort of thing. Like that's the whole what the moment. Like he took that knife to the chest and turn your back on him and he's up and moving again. Even, you know, even prior to that, he disappears, you know, Anna thinks she's got him and the fog machine blows away and there's no body where it should be, right?
Fact. And this is, I mean, and you touched on it, this movie is not perfect. It is not without its faults. And it does, especially in the end, it really does ask you to forgive quite a bit, right? Like, why has this dude survived a bullet to the leg, a bullet to the gut, and a knife to the chest? Like, you know, there's a lot of that. That could also very easily lead to questions of, okay, how far does this super, you know, soldier thing go? You know, is he, you know, and there were drafts of this script where he was like part cyborg or all these other things. So some of this stuff may be carryovers from that, and they just said, no one will ask.
Sure.
There are things you have to forgive here. My argument is, right, watch this movie one time without hearing this. I can totally understand why it might be too far out there, too trippy, too uncomfortable, too non-traditional, whatever you want to say, that it would be difficult to get on board, right?
Yeah.
I would argue that if you think about these things just slightly differently and appreciate some of these elements in a slightly different way, this movie is up there with some of the most fun things that you will watch ever in your life. It's not the best thing you're ever going to watch. It's not the greatest movie ever made. It's not the most incredible action movie. It's none of those things. But it never disappoints when I watch it. It is so much fun. It's in the vein of what It Follows is to horror movies, you know, things like that. That is what this is. It's just different enough. It's just weird enough, and you watch it and you start to like it, and the more you think about it, the more you appreciate it, and maybe you don't totally know why. I think for me, I loved it when I saw it, and I didn't really understand why. The more I've watched it and the more I've thought about it, I've started to, as I have done tonight, figure out why I actually like it and then make that case to people. So, Tim, I rest my case. The defense rests.
Yes.
What have we done? Now you are the jury, my friend. Right. Have we convinced you that this movie is not only worth a watch, but it is excellent for many reasons, and that it is worthy of a deep dive that says, if you're looking for something to watch, put on The Guest. Stop sleeping on it. Put it on and see what you think.
Yeah. So after all of that, I will say I ended this movie exactly the way that you did. Very much like, I like this, but why? There's just parts of this that just feel like I shouldn't. But I'm glad we did it this way, because for everything that you said, if you appreciate it in that way with those thoughts, and for the type of movie that this is, being dropped into this story and having to figure things out real time, it's fun.
It is.
It's just a lot going on, and you're not supposed to know who you're rooting for, right? Now I've changed my mind after, it's like, oh yeah, I wanted the military to get him, catch him before he kills the kids. But you're like, but they created him, and there's potential. We know there's more of him, right?
He is but Frankenstein's monster,
right?
And the Petersons are the little girl by the lake. It's collateral damage, but it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Frankenstein, who is the real villain of Frankenstein.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can approach it that way, then this is a fun romp. We could even say this is an alternative Halloween movie. So you want to save this
for
till
sure.
next Halloween? You want to watch this then? Do it, because it hits that thriller sort of slasher. I kind of also went into this different, and I think that kind of colored my thought of like, well, whatever happens to these people, they deserve it, because I kind of just thought he was going to be a psychopath who's just going to murder all of them in their sleep, right? Or hold them in their house and torture them. And no, that's not what this is, right? So that changes my initial perception. Like, yeah, he's creepy, but he doesn't kill them because he wants to. He says he doesn't. He has to, right? And that just feeds into all that stuff after. However the movie ends in your head, right? Does he, like you said, have that semblance of a man left? Is there anything in there where he can let these kids go, right? He clearly ended up forming a connection with Luke, and there's a little sexual tension with Anna. Could he let these kids go? And
did you just say a little? She
from her,
clearly wants it. Yeah,
from her angle, not so much from him.
No,
I'm sure that's been programmed out of him, right? Although he did.
Well, but he even kind of struggled with it. She was like, "Are you even into this?" And he's like, "Okay, let me turn on my penis."
Right.
She's like, and then he flips her over, and she's like, "Oh, there it is." Yeah, that happens.
Let me turn on my penis. So, that open interpretation ending, you can go any sort of way with it. I think, and watch it again, and then write another ending to it. Maybe on a certain different day, you feel differently about how it ended. Maybe you discover something more about Tony Soprano and decide, no, he deserves to die. So in my head, through this watch, he dies. So
it's so true. The ending could change based on your mood.
Yeah.
Am I feeling David? Am I not? It's so much. It's a fun watch, and I think it sparks some really interesting conversation. And it's one of those movies too. You wish there was more. You wish there was a sequel, but then you're also really glad there isn't. If this movie had done any better, we would have gotten one. If we have a VHS 2, how do we not have a The Guest 2? But I think Dan Stevens has a little more respect.
So it's like, when I make 3 hot dogs and after 2 I'm really happy, and then I try and eat the third and I'm like, I should have just stuck with the 2, right? Like,
God, man, in some ways we're such different people.
And I love hot dogs, and I will find a way to fit that third one in there. But it is, and I think I said to you earlier when we were talking, it's like a good album, right? That it goes by so quick, and it leaves you wanting more, and so you start it over again, right?
Yes.
Like, you'll go back to it and let me watch it again, and then it's over again. So, it's definitely worth a watch. If you really want to see where this comes in comparison to Your Next, you can watch Your Next. It probably does everything wrong that they then subsequently get right with this movie. I mean, you can clearly see in this one where they learned their craft and honed that skill and got this tight, right? And there's no loose ends in this movie, right? You can't, like David, there can be no loose ends.
Yes. No, I dig that. Tim, if you had to give it a score, what would you give it?
I'm gonna go 7. I
think.
Ooh,
nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think, because originality, I mean, it's different, right? And it's fun. And in that sea of what do you want to watch, it's not something you're going to forget, right?
And you're not going to be mad you saw it.
Exactly, right? There are plenty of things where you could waste your evening, and in an hour and 40 minutes, you're going to have time to watch something else too. So you're not going to kill a night or even just be, physically or mentally drained by this. It's quick. It's fun. It's over. Watch it again.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. This one for me is an 8.5 out of 10.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that's built. I probably started about where you are, and I'm ending on like an 8.5 after so many watches. I own this movie. I watch it many, many times a year. And for that exact reason. This isn't one that you would catch on TV. I would say this is one like when it's on, you're gonna watch it. You know what I mean? It's never on TV. I own it. If I'm ever like, man, I want to watch something and I don't, boom, The Guest. Because it's an easy watch, it's an easy lift, and then I can move on with my life. And that is if I don't watch it twice. So it is, it's so good. I'm highly recommend it. I hope you guys enjoy it. Tim, I am thrilled that you watched it and you dug it. This is going to go down as one of my favorite episodes. This is a hard one to top because
I like it.
It's just, I hope I find another one in the course of what we're doing here that makes me feel the way that David makes me feel. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Next week is a rewind episode. No prep needed. Just come and check it out. We're going to talk about some things that have come out recently, things that we've been watching. And we already have 2 listener requests that we're going to be talking about, and we would love to have more. Send us your requests, guys. You guys can hit us up at the website, pausereviews.com. You can hit us up on Instagram at pausereviews. You can email us, pausereviews@gmail.com. Listen to us, obviously, like, subscribe, rate, all that good stuff through the Podbean app or wherever you get your podcasts, and links to all of this stuff are at the site hosted by Podbean. So just go there first, www.pausereviews.com. I gave it to you a second ago. Go there and then click on whatever link works best for you. Like, subscribe, share. We really appreciate it. It super, super helps. And obviously, if you like what you're hearing, tell a friend. That's the best. That's the best way. Word of mouth, guys. Let's grow this together.
Tell them, and then they can tell us what to watch, and then that just works out for everybody. Right?
And then this podcast will just become us watching whatever you guys want. Other than that, I think that's it. Let's wrap this up. As always, I'm your boy Frank.
This is Tim.
And we'll catch you guys next week. Until then, enjoy The Guest.
Yeah.